We are literally surrounded by athletics every single day. But honestly, how often do we actually stop to deconstruct them? Well, today, we're going on a pretty fascinating journey. We're going to start with the basic definitions of playground games and work our way all the way up to the massive, complex business of modern sports management. So, whether you're an aspiring coach, a business major, or honestly just someone who loves a good behind-the-scenes look at how things work, this explainer is absolutely going to change how you view the games we play.
All right, to kick things off, think about NBA basketball, NASCAR, and chess. How would you actually define these? Like which ones are sports, which are games, and which are just hobbies? And maybe more importantly, why? It sounds like a super simple question, right? But as we're about to see, the lines dividing these categories are way more specific and honestly, way more interesting than you might think. So here is our game plan for today. We'll start by defining sports, games, and hobbies. Then we'll do a brief history of athletics. Next up is coaching and leadership. After that, we'll impartially tackle inequality and the wage gap, and finally, we'll go inside sports management.
Section 1. Sports, games, or hobbies.
Okay, the structural differences between a sport and a game are surprisingly distinct. Think of sports as these highly structured physical activities. The rules are totally standardized. Like if you play basketball in California or in France, the court size, the ball weight, the exact definition of a foul, it all remains exactly the same. They also rely on external enforcement, so your referees are judges. And crucially, the motivation often becomes external. Players might start out just having fun, but they keep going because of external rewards like college scholarships or a paying job. Now, games, on the flip side, are way more flexible. Think back to a game of tag you played as a kid. The rules were probably regional, right? Passed down from older kids to younger kids, and you just adapted them to whatever space you had. There are usually zero referees, it's entirely an honesty system, and the motivation? It's pretty much entirely internal. You play a game simply because it brings you joy, and you just want to get better for your own personal happiness.
And so that brings us to where hobbies fit into the picture. A hobby is essentially a catch-all term for activities that just don't neatly fall into sports or games. They don't even have to be physical or competitive at all. Painting is a really great example here. Much like games, hobbies are driven primarily by that internal motivation. You do it because it makes you happy. Although, as our source points out, those lines can definitely blur a bit if someone starts actually making a living selling their art.
Section 2. A brief history of athletics.
Sports didn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? They evolved from a historical, societal need to train young men as warriors. But as the study of human movement developed over time, schools and universities started incorporating organized intercollegiate competition. Fast forward to the 2013 to 2014 academic year, and the NCAA reported a staggering 560,000 student athletes. To put that into perspective, that is literally more than double the number of student athletes from just 1990.
But that massive growth wasn't exactly inclusive at first. Back in the early 1900s, social constraints severely limited women. Actually, get this. In 1904, women were allowed to compete in Olympic archery, primarily because it was an activity you could do without sweating. And even into the 1960s, women were barred from running marathons because of completely incorrect medical beliefs about fertility. Then we look at racial segregation. A truly monumental victory for equality happened in 1936 when Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals in track and field, completely defying Adolf Hitler's ideas of racial superiority right to his face. And finally, skipping ahead to 1972, we see the enactment of Title IX, which was a massive, game-changing turning point for gender inclusion in the United States.
Let's zoom in on Title IX for a second. While it obviously impacts all of public education, from a purely athletic management standpoint, it comes with some very strict logistical requirements. Public schools absolutely must provide equal quality equipment, equal facility time, and roughly equal program offerings for male and female sports. And this has some fascinating practical applications. For instance, because a football program is just so incredibly massive and expensive, schools very often have to offer multiple additional female sports just to offset those costs and stay legally compliant with Title IX.
Section 3. The playbook. Coaching and leadership.
A coach does way more than just yell plays from the sideline. One of their biggest never-ending jobs is this relentless hunt for talent, recruiting. And it's a highly proactive, multi-pronged approach. They're out there evaluating players at high school games in these massive showcase camps. They're grinding through online scouting video profiles. They are constantly on the phone with high school coaches trying to gauge a player's character and work ethic. And ultimately, the whole thing really comes down to hosting campus visits and building these deep, genuine relationships with the athletes and their families, even guiding them through the maze of financial aid and college applications to secure top-tier talent. Once the team is actually together, the coach basically becomes a teacher. The source material outlines an exact 6-step methodology for building a practice plan. First, you define the overarching goals. Second, break those big goals down into smaller, achievable objectives, like, say, improve passing accuracy. Third, pick the appropriate drills for that specific skill level. Fourth, build a strict schedule, and yes, that includes warm-ups and cooldowns. Fifth, you have to be ready to make live adjustments if a drill just isn't working in the moment. And sixth, critically evaluate the team's progress after practice so you can plan for the next day. It is pure pedagogy. Honestly, it's a structural methodology you could easily just pick up and apply to managing a corporate team or a big group project. But look, X's and O's are really only half the battle here. Internal team conflict can literally destroy otherwise successful teams. A truly great coach has to be both a leader and a mediator. They have to acknowledge conflict head-on, rather than just crossing their fingers and hoping it disappears. They've got to facilitate open communication, prioritize teamwork over individual egos, set some very strict ground rules for behavior, and sometimes they even have to bring in external mediators. Managing human beings is often way harder than managing the sport itself. Section 4. Inequality and the wage gap. When looking at baseline pay between the two American professional basketball leagues, a very stark contrast emerges. Based on the figures reported, the average NBA player makes just over $9.6 million a year. On the other hand, the average WNBA player makes just under $130,000 a year. It's important to clarify here that these figures represent just the base salary. They do not include outside income from things like endorsements or product lines. Now, when discussing this gap, the industry frequently points to the underlying economics of the leagues. The total revenue differences are vast. The NBA operates with a profit of about $10 billion a year, whereas the WNBA reportedly runs at about a $10 million deficit annually. The primary argument often used within the industry to justify the unequal pay scale is tied directly to these revenue drivers. Currently, the men's games bring in significantly more money through television viewership and ad revenue, higher ticket sale volumes and prices, and much greater sports merchandise sales. However, the basketball financial model definitely isn't the only one out there. Other sports have taken entirely different approaches to compensation. For example, recently, U.S. Soccer agreed to provide equal pay for their men's and women's national players, though our source does note that an international pay gap still remains. Additionally, sports like CrossFit were actually founded with and currently maintain equal reward money for both male and female competitors. Section 5. Inside Sports Management. If coaching is all about managing the game itself, sports management is about managing the business of the game. It is the engine that keeps the whole machine running. This is a highly multidisciplinary field that draws heavily on business management and marketing, not just kinesiology. A sports manager is coordinating massive events and securing facilities. They're managing incredibly complex budgets and financial strategies, which means they are the ones negotiating contracts with sponsors and broadcasters and figuring out ticket prices to maximize revenue. They're also handling the less glamorous but absolutely crucial administrative tasks like facility maintenance, enforcing drug testing rules, and keeping the athletes safe. And that brings us to a really defining quote about this profession from our source material. All of these external interactions require social skills and finesse in fundraising and making hard financial decisions. That really hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? You aren't just an athlete anymore. You're a negotiator, a marketer, a fundraiser, and an administrator. So if you absolutely love the sports world but find yourself drawn to the business side of things, a career as an athletic director or a sports facilities manager is an incredibly dynamic path to take. All right, so now that you've got the history, the economics, and the management structures that really shape athletics behind the scenes, what is your opinion on the athletic gender wage gap? Looking objectively at the data, what would be a better solution? Think about how the revenue drivers, the management strategies, and the historical contexts we explored today influence your answer. Keep questioning things, keep learning, and hey, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the business of athletics.